Eli Turner hadn't held a winning hand in 5 years, but tonight, in a saloon thick with whiskey and vultures, he wasn't gambling for cattle, he was gambling for an Apache girl. The Silver Ace Saloon crouched on the far edge of Deadwood's main drag like a half-sunken coffin. Lanterns threw jittery shadows across warped floorboards, and the air was a stew of cigar smoke, spilled beer, and bad intentions. The kind of place decent men avoided, and the kind of place Eli Turner now found himself walking into. His boots thudded across the floor, still caked in the red dust of southern Arizona. He kept his hat low, his shoulders square, his left hand near his coat hem, where an old Colt 45 waited like a silent partner. Around him, voices rose and fell, cowhands fresh off the trail, prospectors drowning their last paycheck, and gamblers with smiles like broken knives. Eli hadn't touched a deck of cards since 1880. Back then, he played with a fire in his gut and nothing to lose. Now, everything had changed. He had a wife waiting back at Silver Creek Ranch and the quiet emptiness of a house that was supposed to be filled with children. Years of hard sun and harder luck had wrung the fight from his bones. But desperation had a cruel way of bringing old habits back to life. He spotted Clay Rohr the moment he entered. The bastard hadn't changed. Same slicked-back hair, same embroidered vest that screamed of stolen gold and arrogance. He sat in his usual spot near the back, flanked by 2 hired guns and a dark-haired woman who looked far too bored to be afraid. Rohr grinned when he saw Eli. "Well, hell, fire, and heartbreak, if it ain't Eli Turner, come down from his cactus throne," he drawled, lifting a glass of rye. Eli kept walking, jaw tight. "Didn't figure I'd find you still breathin'. Dead men don't win, Turner. You still know how to lose." Eli said nothing. He pulled out a chair opposite the man and sat down. "Same game?" he asked.
Rohr chuckled, shuffling the deck with the ease of a practiced liar. "Same rules, but I'm adding a little spice tonight." He nodded to one of his men, who disappeared into the shadows and returned, dragging something, no, someone behind him. A girl. She couldn't have been older than 12, 13 at most. Apache by the look of her. Skin the color of old copper, hair a tangled black curtain, her clothes little more than a torn blanket and a dirty sash. Her arms were bound with rough hemp rope, her feet bare, bleeding. She didn't cry, didn't even flinch. She stared straight ahead, jaw tight, eyes full of something ancient and furious. "War prize," Rohr said casually, as if he were offering a stray dog. "Found her after a sweep up near White River. Nobody claimed her. She's yours if you win." Eli froze. "You're betting a child?" Rohr leaned in, voice oily. "You came for steaks, didn't you? Well, here's one that kicks." The room seemed to tilt. Eli glanced at the girl. She turned, just barely, and for a second, one breathless, damning second, he saw something around her neck. A small string of polished turquoise stones, worn, chipped. He knew that necklace. He'd seen one just like it, years ago, in Rosalind's trembling hands after another miscarriage. It had been meant for a daughter that never came. Eli looked at the girl again. No tears, no begging, just those eyes, wolf eyes. He closed his fist, felt the bone grind against callus. "What's the buy-in?" he asked. Rohr smirked. $500, or whatever a man like you still has left." Eli reached into his coat, tossed a money clip onto the table. "Deal." The deck clacked between Rohr's fingers like bones being rattled by the devil. Around them, the saloon quieted.
drinkers pausing mid-swig, gamblers leaning in with grins twitching at the corners of their mouths. Everyone loved a blood sport, and this one smelled like ruin. "5-card draw," Roar said, flicking cards across the table like a carnival hustler. "No wilds, no mercy." Eli's cards landed in a neat fan before him. He didn't touch 'em right away. He studied Roar first, those beady eyes, the twitch in his jaw, the way he tapped his ring finger twice before tucking his own cards into his palm. Bluff, Eli thought, always was. He picked up his hand. 2 pair, kings and tens. Good, but not good enough. Not with Roar. They drew. Eli discarded 1. His gut said 1. Drew the next card slow, like it might bite him. Another king. Full house. The air felt thick. He could hear the creak of the girl's rope against the post behind them, the wheeze of the saloon ceiling fan, the buzz of something shifting in the air like a storm not far off. "Call it," Roar said. Eli laid down his cards, one by one. King, 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 10, 10. The room went quiet. Even the piano player missed a note. Roar's smirk faded. He stared down at his hand, straight to the jack. Close, too close. He laughed, dry and bitter. "Son of a—" "She's mine," Eli said. Roar looked at the girl like she was a spilled drink. "Take her," he spat. "Hope you like trouble, Turner. Apache trouble ain't the kind that stays quiet." Eli stood, slid the money, his last damn roll, off the table and tucked it back into his coat. Then he walked over to the girl. She didn't move. Her eyes followed him like a blade. He pulled a small knife from his belt and sliced the rope around her wrists. "You got a name?" he asked quietly. She looked up at him, lips chapped and split. "Clara," she rasped. Then, after a pause, more like a dare than a statement, she added, "Little Fawn." He nodded. "I'm Eli." She didn't reply. They left the saloon together, drawing a trail of silence behind them as they stepped into the cold desert night. Lanterns flickered behind swinging doors. Laughter resumed inside, the kind that meant nothing. Eli hoisted her onto the wagon bench, wrapping his old canvas duster around her shoulders. She didn't thank him, just stared into the dark. The ride west was long and wordless. Coyotes cried from the hills. Moonlight cut the chaparral in pale silver lines. The wagon wheels groaned under the weight of silence, and 2 strangers, too tired to be afraid. Somewhere near dawn, Clara stirred. "You gonna sell me back?" she asked, her voice flat. "No." "You got a wife?" "Yes." "She want a kid like me?" Eli glanced over. Her eyes were fixed on the horizon, sharp as barbed wire. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but she'll feed you. Warm bed, no ropes." She looked down at the coat draped over her. "You're stupid," she said. Eli gave a dry chuckle. "Yeah." They crested a ridge as the sun bled orange across the sky. Below them, Silver Creek Ranch sprawled out like a broken hand, barns sagging, fences leaning, cattle few and skinny. But it was home. "That it?" Clara asked. "That's it." "It looks half dead." Eli didn't argue. Most things worth saving do. She didn't answer, but for the first time she pulled the coat tight around her. They rolled down the hill into the ranch, the dust rising behind them like ghosts. The wagon rolled to a stop just past the main gate of Silver Creek Ranch. The morning sun cast long shadows over the pasture, and a thin mist clung to the grass like ghost breath. Eli climbed down first, stiff from the ride. Clara stayed where she was, wrapped in his old canvas duster, staring at the house like it might bite her. The front door creaked open. Rosalind Turner stood on the porch, arms folded, eyes sharp as flint beneath the brim of her sun-bleached bonnet. "What the hell is this?" she asked, not moving. Eli stepped around the wagon, his hands loose but ready for the storm he knew was coming. "This is Clara," he said. She's Apache," Rosalind cut in, her voice tight. "You brought home an Apache child?" "She's not with them," Eli said. "She was tied up in a saloon, traded in a poker game like a damn mule." Rosalind's jaw clenched. She looked at Clara.
The girl met her stare without blinking. "I don't care how you got her, Eli," Rosalind said. "You don't bring this to our door. Not now, not with everything falling apart." "She needs shelter," Eli said quietly. "We all do." A long silence stretched between them. Finally, Rosalind let out a breath. "Fine, she stays, but she eats outside and she doesn't come near the house at night." Clara didn't react. She climbed down on her own and walked past them both without a word, heading toward the barn. She slept that night in the hayloft, curled in the corner like a wild animal, one hand gripping the handle of a broken pitchfork. No one asked questions. The days that followed were quiet but thick with tension. Clara worked without being told, hauling water, stacking feed, mucking stalls with the grim focus of someone used to earning her keep or getting kicked out. She didn't speak unless spoken to, and even then her answers came clipped, neutral. Rosalind watched from a distance, arms often folded, lips pressed tight. Eli knew that look. It meant she was worried and maybe a little afraid. On the fourth morning, Eli was up before dawn fixing a slat in the western fence line when he saw it. Prints in the damp earth. Fresh. Too fresh. Horse hooves. Not theirs. Not the neighbors'. The depth told him whoever rode through was heavy in the saddle. Armed. He followed the tracks to the edge of the creek where they vanished into the rocks. A warning, not an accident. That evening, Clara was tending the chickens when she suddenly froze, her head tilted toward the eastern ridge. Eli caught the movement from the corral and walked over, wiping his hands on a rag. "You see something?" he asked. Clara didn't look at him. Smoke, real thin, far off. He followed her gaze. For a moment, nothing. Then he saw it, a faint wisp, low and narrow, curling skyward near the base of the hills. Apache signal smoke, or maybe worse, someone trying to fake it. Clara's jaw tightened. "They're watching," she said. "You sure?" "They always watch before they strike." Eli didn't ask how she knew. That night, he oiled the hinges on the barn doors and checked the rifle under the bed. Rosalind didn't argue when he put extra logs on the fire or asked her to keep the shotgun loaded and close. She sat at the kitchen table, watching Clara eat her supper in silence. "She doesn't even flinch when she hears coyotes," Rosalind said. "What kind of child is that?" Eli poured a mug of coffee. "The kind that's seen worse than coyotes." Rosalind looked away. "I don't know if I can do this, Eli." "You already are." Outside, the wind picked up, whistling through the eaves. Clara stood by the barn window, staring into the dark with those same wolf eyes. Waiting, listening, measuring. Like she knew trouble wasn't just coming, it was already here. The next morning brought no sun, just a heavy gray haze that pressed down on the land like a warning. Eli rose before first light, restless. He found Clara already up, standing barefoot in the frost-dusted grass behind the barn, her arms crossed, eyes fixed on the distant ridge. "You always keep watch like this?" he asked, approaching quietly. Clara didn't turn. "Where I'm from, the only time it's quiet is when something bad's about to happen." Eli studied her profile. She looked more like a shadow than a child. Thin, silent, carved from the same stone as the land. "You from the White Mountains?" he asked. She nodded slowly. "My people call it Zil-Ligai." Eli tucked his hands into his coat. "You got any folks left?" She didn't answer right away. Then, softly, "No." They stood there a moment in silence, breathing the same cold air.
Then Clara reached into the folds of her makeshift sash, pulled out a small leather pouch, and held it out. "Here," she said, "you should see it." Eli hesitated, then took the pouch in both hands. It was worn and cracked at the edges, decorated with faded beadwork and small, carefully tied feathers. A medicine bag, Apache made, no question. The weight of it felt alive. He opened it slowly. Inside were 3 polished stones, each etched with strange symbols, Apache pictographs. There was also a folded strip of deerskin, stiff with age. Eli unwrapped it gently and found more markings, names, dates, places, all written in blocky English. "Ledger?" he murmured. Clara nodded. "My father kept records of those who betrayed us, paid men like Rohr. One of them was a captain in the army, another a missionary. They came offering peace, then brought fire and chains." Eli's gut tightened. "Your father?" "He was Nantan Toga, war chief of the Eagle Band." Her voice dropped, a flicker of pride threading through the grief. "He didn't survive the last raid." Eli ran a thumb over the name burned into the parchment. "And this? It's why they're hunting you." Clara looked him in the eye then, steady, unwavering. "It's not just about revenge. This bag holds the proof, the truth. If the right people saw this, Rohr would hang, so would others. And you've been carrying it? Always. Why give it to me?" She hesitated. "Because you haven't sold me yet." The words hung between them like fog. Eli closed the bag and handed it back. "I ain't planning to." She tucked it away again, quiet and efficient. Back in the kitchen, Rosalind watched Clara from across the table as she tore bread into cautious bites. "She's been out there since before dawn," Rosalind said to Eli, "like she doesn't know how to rest." "She doesn't," he replied, lowering himself into a chair. "She's carrying something. She's a child. She's a witness, a target, and maybe a key." Rosalind didn't respond. She stared into her coffee for a long time before finally whispering, "You trust her?" "I trust what she's survived." That night, as the fire burned low and the house settled into stillness, Eli checked the locks twice. Then he loaded the Winchester, placed it by the door, and sat in the dark with a single thought in his mind. He wasn't just protecting a girl, he was sheltering the storm that would bring the whole damn mountain down. Clara didn't speak much in the early days, but she moved with purpose. When Eli fixed the broken fence posts out by the north field, Clara was there, handing him nails and hammer without being asked. When Rosalind milked the goats at dawn, Clara was already by the pail, barefoot in the frost, silent as the mist. By the end of the week, Rosalind stopped watching her with suspicion and started handing her a second spoon at breakfast. One afternoon, Eli caught Clara watching the herd from the top rail of the corral, legs swinging absently, eyes scanning the hills. Her gaze wasn't idle, it was protective, measured. He climbed up beside her. "You ever ride?" She shook her head. "My father didn't let me. Said horses should fear you before they carry you." Eli chuckled. "That why you keep staring at Blue?" Blue was his meanest mare, half wild, half stubborn, and entirely uninterested in being tamed. Clara gave the faintest smile. "She's angry." "She's got every right, same as you." The girl turned her head, then asked softly, "You think I'm angry?" "I think you've earned it." The next day, he saddled Blue. Just once, just to let the mare see the saddle. Clara watched, didn't say a word. By the third day, Clara was brushing her down without flinching, whispering something soft and foreign into Blue's twitching ears. Rosalind stood by the door, arms folded, trying not to look impressed. That night, Clara helped Rosalind clean the kitchen. There was a quiet rhythm to the work, plates scraped, water poured, hands moving in sync.
Rosalind handed Clara a towel to dry the tin plates. Clara took it. No words, but no hesitation either. Then, just as Rosalind turned toward the stove, Clara spoke, soft, unsure. "Rosalind?" Rosalind paused. It was the first time Clara had said her name. "Yes?" "Do you have a daughter?" Rosalind's hands stilled. Her back remained to Clara. "No," she said. "We tried, but the Lord had other plans." Silence filled the room. Then Clara whispered, "I'm sorry." Rosalind turned around slowly, her eyes glistening. "Thank you." The next morning, Clara placed a small bundle on the table. Inside, a rough-cut cloth ball with button eyes and black yarn hair. "I made her," Clara said, "for the daughter you wanted." Rosalind didn't cry, but she sat down, cradling the doll like it was bone and breath. Later that evening, Eli returned from the creek with 2 fish and a quiet look on his face. "Tom Bradley stopped by," he said. "Said he saw 3 riders heading south yesterday. Didn't look like ranchers." "Apache?" Rosalind asked. "Too clean, too silent." Clara spoke without looking up from her needlework. "They're scouts, hired ones." Rosalind frowned. "How can you tell?" Clara held up her fingers. "Horses tied with bone knots. No dust on their boots. Means they're new to the land. Paid to follow, not to survive." Eli met Rosalind's gaze. She didn't have to say it aloud. Clara was more than a witness. She was a survivor with teeth. That night, as the fire crackled low, Clara sat by the hearth and began to hum. The tune was low, rhythmic, full of strange turns and minor chords that felt older than the walls around them. "What's that?" Eli asked. "A lullaby," Clara said, "from my mother." Rosalind joined them, drying her hands on her apron. "What does it mean?" Clara paused. "It says, 'Even when the fire dies, the stars remember your name.'" No one spoke after that. They just listened.
And for the first time since the girl came to Silver Creek, it felt like a family was forming, not by blood, but by choice, by pain shared, by the long, slow work of learning to trust again. It happened on the 7th night. The wind shifted just after sundown, carrying with it a scent Eli hadn't smelled in years: grease, sweat, and black powder. It wasn't ranch smoke. It was men, armed, close. He was by the barn when the first shot cracked through the silence. The bullet buried itself in the wooden post beside his head. "Down!" he roared, diving for cover. From the house, Rosalind screamed Clara's name. Then the world exploded. Gunfire tore through the darkness. Sharp, staccato cracks echoed off the canyon walls. The chickens shrieked. The horses panicked. A second bullet punched into the side of the barn, and Eli rolled behind a trough, cursing under his breath. He caught sight of 3 silhouettes moving low across the ridge. One crouched and lit a bottle with a rag. Fire bloomed, a Molotov. They weren't just here to kill, they were here to burn. Eli popped up, aimed, and fired. The man dropped, his bottle bursting midair in a flash of blue fire. "Clara!" he bellowed, sprinting for the house. Inside, Rosalind had Clara pinned to the floor behind the stove. Buckshot had blown out 2 windows, scattering glass across the room. The girl was clutching the medicine bag tight against her chest. "They want this," she whispered. "They'll kill you for it." Eli knelt beside her, blood trickling from a gash on his cheek. "Then they'll have to kill all 3 of us." A voice echoed outside, gravel thick and cruel. "Turner, we don't want you, just the girl." Eli's stomach turned. He knew that voice. Jake Mallory, ex-Army, now mercenary. A killer who'd once tortured prisoners for bounty and got a handshake instead of a trial. Eli stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand. "Jake," he called out, "you riding for Roar now?" "Nope," Jake replied from the dark. "I ride for gold."
"And this little half-breed has a bounty big enough to buy half a Tucson." Eli cocked the rifle. "You'll need the other half to pay for your grave." A shot answered him. Eli dove behind the porch post as lead splintered the railing. Back inside, Clara had already moved. She grabbed Rosalind's shotgun and crawled toward the pantry. From there, she fired through the broken window, and a man outside screamed. Rosalind stared. Where the hell did she learn to do that? "She's Apache," Eli muttered. "They're born in fire." A second wave came hard. 6 men pushing toward the barn, 2 toward the front door. Eli dropped one with a gut shot, another with a bullet between the eyes, but they kept coming. Then a sound. Horses. Multiple. And a familiar voice shouting, "Get the hell off his land!" Tom Bradley and 3 neighbors burst through the fence line, rifles blazing. The attackers, caught between crossfire and confusion, broke formation. One tried to run and caught a shotgun blast to the spine. The others scattered into the dark. By the time the smoke cleared, 2 attackers lay dead. One bled out near the watering trough. Another was tied to the fence post, groaning, his shoulder shattered. Tom slapped Eli on the back. "Hell of a welcome party." Eli didn't smile. He turned to Clara, who stood on the porch, face grim and quiet, the medicine bag still in hand. "This won't stop them," she said. Eli nodded. "No, but now we know what we're up against." Behind them, the barn smoldered. A fire bucket brigade had kept the blaze from spreading, but the damage was clear. War had come to Silver Creek. And it had a name. The morning after the attack, Silver Creek lay still under a coat of ash and silence. The barn was blackened. One corner collapsed in charred ruin. The goats bleated nervously. The horses wouldn't stop pacing the fence line. And Eli, he hadn't slept. He stood outside, rifle across his chest, staring toward the southern ridge. "Jake Mallory doesn't ride alone," he muttered. "If Roar sent him, more will come." Behind him, Rosalind stepped onto the porch, wrapping her shawl tight against the chill. "We can ride east, leave everything, head for Bisbee or Prescott." Eli shook his head. "They'd track us. And Clara, she's the reason they're coming. That medicine bag is a map to Roar's sins. They won't stop until they burn it, and her, into dust." Rosalind swallowed hard, her voice trembling. "Then what do we do?" Eli turned to face her, eyes hollowed by smoke and sleeplessness. "We stop running." She blinked. "What?" "I'm going to Deadwood." "Eli, I've been hiding behind this fence for 5 years. Thought if I stayed quiet, the world would leave me be. That's not how this works." Rosalind stepped forward, clutching his arm. "That place is crawling with men like Roar. You won't make it 10 steps." "I don't need 10, just 1, right up to his table." From behind them, Clara spoke. "I'm coming too." They turned. The girl stood by the doorway, already wearing her worn leather boots and a patched blanket slung over her shoulder. "No," Eli said firmly. "You stay here. This isn't your fight." "Yes, it is," she answered. "It was mine before it ever touched your land." Rosalind looked between them, then nodded slowly. "She's right." Eli clenched his jaw. "She's a child." Clara stepped closer. "No, I was a child when they burned our camp and put my father's name on a bounty list. I was a child when they sold me in a saloon. But now, I'm the only one who remembers. And if I don't carry this truth, no one else will." She placed the medicine bag in his hand again. "I trust you to bring it to the right place." Eli stared at the pouch. Its weight felt heavier now, not from the stones inside, but from what it meant. Lives, truth, justice, or maybe vengeance. "Tom'll stay here," he said at last. "Help keep the ranch safe." Rosalind nodded, eyes wet. "You sure you want to do this?" Eli strapped the Winchester across his saddle, mounted up, and looked back one final time. For 5 years, I've let the past decide who I am. Not anymore. He turned to Clara. You're not just some girl I saved, Clarabelle. You're my responsibility now. She nodded. Then, after a beat, added, and you're mine. They rode out at first light, dust kicking behind their horses, sun bleeding through the canyon like a blade drawn slow. As the ranch faded into the distance, Eli's mind burned with old instincts. How to read tracks, how to watch shadows, how to breathe slower when the gun's already drawn on you. Deadwood was 2 days' ride through outlaw country. But he wasn't riding for cattle, he was riding for the truth, for a girl who deserved to be more than a witness, and for the man he once was, the one who didn't run. Deadwood wasn't a town, it was a wound that never healed. Perched between 2 ridgelines like a scar on the land, the place stank of whiskey, sweat, and secrets. Buildings leaned like drunks. Gunmetal glinted from alley shadows. And above it all, hanging crooked from rusted hinges, the sign of the Silver Ace Saloon creaked in the wind. Eli Turner hadn't set foot here in nearly 6 years. Last time, he left with blood on his boots and a bullet still in his side. This time, he came back with a medicine bag and a girl watching his every step. Clarabelle dismounted just outside the saloon, her hand steady on the saddle horn. Her eyes didn't flinch as a pair of thugs staggered out the front doors, half drunk and fully armed. "You sure you want to do this?" Eli asked. She nodded once. "I've seen worse men. I was sold to one." Eli clenched his jaw, handed her the rifle. "Stay with the horses. Don't follow me unless you hear 3 gunshots in a row. That's the signal." For what? For hell. He stepped inside. The saloon was all smoke and false laughter. Tin cups clinked. Poker chips slapped tables. A woman in red stockings played a piano in a slow, off-key rhythm, her smile hollow as a coffin lid. And at the back table, like a spider in his web, sat Clay Rohr. Still thick-chested, with rings on every finger and a scar that ran from temple to jaw like a canyon carved by sin. He didn't look surprised when Eli walked in, just mildly amused. "Well, well," Rohr drawled, sippin' whiskey, "if it ain't the ghost of Silver Creek." Eli didn't sit. He walked to the table, slow and deliberate, and dropped the medicine bag dead center on the cards. A few nearby gamblers went quiet. The piano stopped. Rohr's smirk twitched. "I thought you'd buried your guts somewhere west of Tucson." Eli leaned in. "You remember that girl you lost in a card game?" Rohr's fingers twitched toward the holster. Eli's hand was already there. "Don't," Eli said. The room held its breath. Rohr laughed. "You've got brass, I'll give you that." "This isn't about her," Eli said. "It's about what she carries." He tapped the bag. "You know what's inside. Names, symbols, things that don't forget." Rohr glanced around. "You think anyone in this room gives a damn about Apache scribbles?" Eli's voice dropped. "Not yet, but I reckon the judge in Prescott might. Or the Army in Fort Whitley. Maybe even the federal boys sniffing around those mining claims you stole from the San Carlos reservation." Silence. Then Eli leaned back, voice calm but cold. "You're not just a drunk with a taste for girls anymore, Rohr. You're a thread. And if I pull hard enough, the whole damn fabric comes undone." Rohr studied him. The gambler mask was cracking. "What do you want?" "Leave us alone. Burn your bounty lists. Call off Jake Mallory. And you tell the next man who rides for my ranch he better bring a coffin." "And in return?" Eli smiled, grim. "You get to keep breathing." A long beat passed.
Then Roar pushed the bag back toward Eli. "Fine," he said.
"You've made your point." But his eyes said something else, something that promised this wasn't over. Eli picked up the bag, turned, and walked out. Outside, Clara stood beside the horses, already saddled. "Well?" she asked. He didn't answer, just mounted up. And as they rode out of Deadwood, the wind carried behind them a sound neither of them liked. Laughter. Soft, mocking, and loaded like a gun. They rode out of Deadwood just after noon. By dusk, the land was breathing dust and copper light, and Eli had already spotted the signs. Fresh tracks. Rider boot prints. Too many for a scouting party. He didn't say anything to Clara, not yet. But when they stopped to water the horses near a dry arroyo, Eli walked 30 paces out, knelt by a scuffed mesquite branch, and touched the dirt. It was warm, disturbed recently. A trap. "They're ahead of us," he murmured, eyes narrowing. "Waiting." Clara tightened her grip on the rifle. "So what do we do?" Eli stood. "We don't ride into the trap. We set our own." They rode half a mile south, where the ridgeline choked into a natural bottleneck. 2 steep rises and a canyon mouth barely wide enough for a wagon. Eli knew the spot. He'd buried 2 outlaws here once. Now he was betting his life on the land, knowing him back. They set up fast. Clara climbed a ledge with the rifle. Eli stacked brush to hide his form, laying prone with his Winchester pointed down the pass. And then they waited. The first rider came silent. No talking, no whistles, just the whisper of tack leather and the steady rhythm of hooves on sand. 6 of them, maybe 7. Eli waited until the first was dead center in the bottleneck. He fired. The man pitched backward off his horse, blood spraying the dust. Chaos erupted. Shots fired blind. Horses screamed. A second man tried to wheel left. Clara dropped him with a clean shoulder shot from above. "Nice," Eli whispered, then rolled to a new position as bullets tore into the brush behind him. They fought for nearly 10 minutes. When the smoke thinned, 5 men lay dead in the canyon, and the rest were galloping back toward Deadwood with empty saddles and shredded nerves. Eli stood, chest heaving. He hadn't fought like that in years. His hands shook, not from fear, but from memory. Clara climbed down slowly, face pale but resolute. "You were right," she said. "He never planned to let us leave." "No," Eli said, "but now we've sent him a different message." They didn't go straight home. Instead, they made a wide loop through the dry wash trails, riding under moonlight until the crooked fence posts of Silver Creek rose into view. But the ranch was not as they'd left it. The barn was open. Lanterns burned along the porch, swinging wildly in the wind. And smoke, faint but there, trailed from the north field. Eli's blood froze. "Too quiet," he said. Then, bang! A shot cracked from the rear corral. Eli jumped from the saddle and ran low across the yard, motioning Clara to flank wide with the rifle. Another shot, this time from inside the house. "Rosalind!" He kicked in the front door. Tom Bradley lay in the foyer, bleeding from a wound in his side, but alive. "They came just before sundown," he gasped. "Held Rosalind, said they were waiting for you. They're still—" Before he could finish, a voice called from upstairs. "Turner!" Eli looked up. Jake Mallory stood on the landing, holding Rosalind by the arm. Her face was bruised. Her eyes met Eli's, calm, defiant, unbroken. Jake sneered. "Trade the girl and the bag, or the lady gets a new hole." Clara stepped into view behind Jake, silent as smoke. She raised the rifle. Jake turned too slow. Crack! The bullet caught his shoulder. He staggered, fired wild, missed, and Eli tackled him down the stairs in a crash of limbs and splinters. They rolled, fists, blood, boots slamming against hardwood. Jake reached for his pistol. Eli drove a knife into his thigh, then his chest, then his throat. Only the creak of the wind. Clara helped Rosalind down. Eli stood, soaked in sweat and gunpowder. The house was theirs again. But the war wasn't over. 3 days later, the people of Dustwater Crossing gathered in the old church-turned-courthouse, its faded pews now filled with miners, ranchers, and even a few weary soldiers from Fort Whitley. They had all come for one reason: to see if the rumors were true. If Clay Rohr, the untouchable saloon baron, land thief, and ghost maker, was finally going to fall. At the front of the room, standing straight-backed behind a crude wooden podium, was a U.S. Circuit judge named Samuel Riggs, summoned quietly by Rosalind with the help of Tom Bradley and the fort's commanding officer. A man who hated politics but loved evidence. And next to him stood Clara Belle Turner. She wore a faded buckskin dress. Her hair had been brushed straight by Rosalind's careful hands. Around her neck, the medicine bag rested like a badge. The courtroom went still. Then the judge nodded. "You may proceed, young lady." Clara opened the bag. She spoke slowly, first in Apache, then again in English, her voice trembling but steadying with every word. "These are the names of the men who broke their word, who promised peace but brought fire, who killed my father and told the world he deserved it. These are the dates, the treaties, the pieces of paper they tore apart and burned, while the ashes were still warm on our people's skin." She laid out the bundle of leather scrolls one by one. Symbols, maps, signatures, names. And then came the final piece. A deed, signed by Clay Rohr himself, selling land he never owned to a mining company in return for a share of silver. The land belonged to the San Carlos Apache. The ink hadn't even dried on the stolen treaty. The crowd shifted. Whispers turned to murmurs. Eli stood in the back, watching. He didn't speak, didn't move. This was Clara's war now. The judge took the documents, examined the ink and seals. He looked to the officers present, then to Rohr, seated, bound, glowering with a busted lip and 2 broken fingers. "I believe," Judge Riggs said, voice cold and clear, "that this territory has been sold a lie." A murmur of agreement rose like a prairie wind. Rohr growled, "That little girl's a savage. She lies with every breath." Eli stepped forward now, eyes locked with Rohr. "She didn't lie about Deadwood. She didn't lie about Jake. She didn't lie about you." Rohr's face went white. Clara turned slowly to him. "You lost me in a card game, Mr. Rohr," she said, "but I was never yours to trade." She walked straight to the judge and handed over the bag. "Do what needs to be done." The judge nodded solemnly. "Mr. Rohr will be held for federal trial in Prescott, charged with fraud, conspiracy, and multiple counts of unlawful imprisonment. Until then, he is remanded into military custody." A cheer broke out from the benches. Men who'd once spat at the ground Clara walked on now stood in thunderous applause. But she didn't smile. She simply stepped down, walked back to Eli, and whispered, "Is it over?" Eli looked around, at the rising sun outside, at the woman standing tall beside him, at the child who wasn't a child anymore. "No," he said softly, "it's just beginning." They returned to Silver Creek that night, but peace did not follow them. 2 days after Clay Rohr was hauled off in chains, word spread like wildfire across the territory. Jake Mallory's younger brother, Bo Mallory, was riding south with 20 hired guns and a thirst for vengeance. Eli didn't flinch. He rebuilt the front fence, repaired the hinges on the barn, reinforced the windows. Rosalind stockpiled food and water. Clara trained with the rifle, her aim growing truer with every sunrise. And then they waited. At dawn on the third day, they came. Dust rose like a curtain behind 24 horses. Faces covered in kerchiefs, rifles slung low. Bo Mallory at the front, younger than Jake, leaner, but with the same dead-eyed hunger for cruelty. He didn't shout, he just raised his hand. And the shooting began. The first volley slammed into the outer fences, splintering wood. Eli returned fire from the corral post, picking off a man who dared approach with dynamite. Rosalind, steady and sharp, fired from the upstairs window with her father's old Springfield. Clara, hidden in the hayloft, waited. Bo's men tried to flank. Clara dropped one with a lung shot, another with a knee shot that left the man screaming in dirt. They kept coming. Fire licked the side of the barn. Eli grabbed a wet feed sack, smothered it. His lungs burned, but he kept fighting. Bo roared from his saddle, "Burn it all! If I can't have my brother, I'll take everything Turner loves." The barn shook. A lantern was thrown inside. And that's when Clara emerged, buckskin torn, face streaked with ash, holding her ground. She didn't fire. She just stepped into the light and raised the medicine bag. The gunman hesitated. Something in the way she stood, young but unyielding, Apache but American, a ghost and a flame, made their hands falter. Bo laughed. "You think some beads and feathers will stop me?" He spurred forward. That's when Eli stepped out from the shadows, holding his Winchester at his hip. One shot. Bo Mallory fell backward off his horse, neck snapped like a brittle twig. The rest scattered. They didn't ride away, they fled. The fire died with the wind. The yard fell silent, save for the crackling wood and Clara's breath. She hadn't fired a single shot in the last 10 seconds, but she had won. The morning after the fire, Silver Creek was quiet. Not broken, just still. Ash clung to the grass. The barn roof smoked gently, a few blackened boards standing like stubborn survivors. Eli Turner stood in the yard, a cup of black coffee in one hand, the other resting on his holster, but not in fear. For once, there was no one left to fight. Inside the house, Rosalind sat with Clara Belle at the kitchen table, brushing dried mud from the girl's arms and showing her how to fold napkins the proper way. Clara didn't speak much, but she didn't flinch anymore. The rifle leaned in the corner, untouched. Later that day, a rider came from Fort Whitley with word. Clay Rohr had been transferred under armed guard to Prescott. His trial would begin in 2 months. Tom Bradley arrived on horseback that evening, arms still in a sling. "Looks like the storm passed," he said, dismounting. "You all right?" Eli nodded slowly. "We're breathing, that counts." Tom looked over at Clara, who stood barefoot in the dirt, watching 2 surviving goats nibble at hay. "She's different," Tom said. "Stronger." "She always was," Eli replied. "We just had to see it." That night, Clara sat at the dinner table like she'd always belonged there. After supper, she helped Rosalind dry dishes. Then she followed Eli outside, where the stars burned through the charcoal sky. "Are you gonna send me back now?" she asked quietly. Eli looked at her. She wasn't a stray anymore. She was part of the land, the wood, the fire that refused to die. "No," he said, "not unless you want to go." "I don't." "Then you stay. But there's one condition." She looked up. "You keep your name," he said. "Your real name." She smiled, just barely, and nodded. "Clara Little Fawn Turner," she whispered, "daughter of 2 worlds." And somewhere, beyond the horizon, a wind picked up, not harsh, but strong, like something ancient and watching had finally exhaled. Weeks passed. And slowly, word began to spread. Not about the gunfight, not about Roar, but about a ranch up near the high ridge, where a white man and his wife had taken in a half-wild Apache girl, and hadn't just let her stay, but called her family. It started with a knock at the gate one morning. A weathered woman with 3 children, tired, sunburnt, shoeless, stood holding a crumpled flyer from Dustwater Crossing.
They didn't say much. They didn't have to. Rosalind brought out warm bread. Clara fetched water. Eli found space in the loft. Then came a Lakota boy whose parents had been gunned down in a cattle raid. Then 2 Irish siblings who'd run from the mines. Then a girl from El Paso, barely 8, with eyes like old thunderclouds. They didn't ask for names. They just said, "You're safe now." Silver Creek changed. A new barn went up. A bigger table was built. Rosalind started sewing names into blankets. Eli taught them to ride and rope. Clara taught them to track rabbit trails and carve wind whistles from willow bark. No one asked what tribe you were from. No one asked what color your skin had been. They just asked if you were hungry, if you were cold, if you wanted to stay. One afternoon, as the children ran laughing past the old post fence, Clara stood beside Eli, watching the dust trail rise behind their feet. "We should name this place something else," she said. Eli raised an eyebrow. "Silver Creek not good enough for you?" She smiled. "It's not just about you anymore." He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "What'd you have in mind?" She turned to the field, to the open sky, to the sounds of boots and bare feet and laughter rising like songbirds, and said, "Sanctuary Ridge." Eli took off his hat. "That'll do just fine." And from that day on, Silver Creek became more than a ranch. It became a legend. A place where orphans of war, of greed, of prejudice, white, brown, Apache, Irish, black, could come and build a life worth living. Together. Years later, when the Arizona sun had weathered the barn to a soft gray, and the fence posts leaned like tired sentinels, folks still told stories about Sanctuary Ridge. They said it wasn't just a ranch, it was a promise. A place built not by money or bloodline, but by broken people who chose not to stay broken. They told of Eli Turner, the infertile rancher who once believed he had nothing left to offer the world, until he laid eyes on a wild-eyed Apache girl chained to a poker post and made a choice no one else would. They spoke of Rosalind, who once buried her hope in the dry earth and now tended children like sunflowers, each different, each stubborn, each reaching for a sky they never thought they'd deserve. And they told of Clarabelle Little Fawn Turner, who came into their lives with bruises and silence, and ended up changing the fate of a town, a tribe, and a man who had forgotten how to believe in second chances. Some said it was legend. Others said it was truth told too beautifully to be real. But Clara knew, because she was there when it burned, when it bled, when the bullets flew, when the silence after the storm was louder than the thunder. And she was there when the land healed, when new footprints joined the old, when love wasn't earned but given, when she looked into the eyes of a child who had nothing and said, "You're home now." That's when she knew. Legends aren't born in saloons or graveyards. They're born in the quiet choices, the risk to care, the decision to stay. One fall afternoon, years later, Clarabelle stood alone near the ridge that overlooked the pasture. In her hands was a medicine bag, not the original. This one she had sewn herself. Inside it were no sacred stones or treaty records, just a lock of Rosalind's hair, a sliver of wood from the old poker table, and a torn piece of a wanted poster with Clay Rohr's name faded to a whisper. She knelt down at the edge of the ridge, dug a shallow hole, and buried it, not to forget, but to remind, of what had been overcome, of what could still be overcome. Behind her, a group of children shouted and played. She turned, smiled, and walked back toward the ranch house, where smoke rose from the chimney and laughter spilled from the kitchen like the scent of fresh bread.
She had inherited no blood, but she had built a family of choice, and that was more powerful than blood ever could be. So what's the lesson here? Maybe it's this. You don't have to be a hero to change someone's life. Sometimes you just have to not walk away. Sometimes you just have to step in when no one else will. Eli Turner didn't set out to become a legend. He wasn't looking for redemption. He just saw someone in chains and said no more. And in doing so, he gave a girl her future, and she gave him back his soul. And what about you? Maybe you've never stood at a poker table with a child's life on the line. Maybe you've never fought off 20 men on horseback with nothing but grit and an old Winchester. But maybe you've had a chance to do something brave and wondered if it was worth the trouble. Here's your answer. Yes, because what feels like a small act of mercy to you might be the only act of hope someone else ever gets. That's what this story is really about. Not guns, not gold, not even revenge. It's about second chances, chosen families, the kind of courage that shows up with an open door instead of a loaded gun. And if this story moved you even a little, then maybe you're ready to hear more stories like it. Because the Wild West wasn't just saloons and shootouts, it was a land of hard choices, deep scars, and people who dared to do good in a world that didn't reward it. And those people? They deserve to be remembered. So if you believe in mercy, in redemption, in the quiet power of doing the right thing, then you're in the right place. This is one of many true Wild West stories. Stories about honor, sacrifice, forgiveness, and the families we choose. Stick around, there's more to come. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Because legends like Clara Bell and Eli Turner don't just belong in the past. They're still out there, waiting to be found, waiting to be told.